We're joined today by Jim Wiesmeyer, Washington policy analyst for Pro Farmer and Farm Journal Media. Jim, let's talk about this Russia-Ukraine situation escalating overnight. Markets reacting big to start Wednesday. What do we know right now?
Well, I feel like I'm a war correspondent now. The war of words has turned into an actual war, a war of air, land, and sea. If you're Russia, going against a full-fledged attack on Ukraine. Major implications here as far as the markets, the equity markets. As we speak, the Dow's down 730, which tells me they didn't think that Putin, Russia's leader, believed what he tried to tell the Western world in July, by the way, and again earlier this week. This is a major development that is affecting markets. You saw crude energy prices in Europe this morning went up a little over 40% in one day. You think energy prices are high here. Wow. And of course, we have our energy prices going. From an agriculture perspective across the board, they're up because of the significance of Russia and Ukraine and the corn and the wheat export arena. And over 75% of sunflower oil trade is from that region. So yes, we have major implications.
Jim, as we look at this, obviously there's risk to our own markets, and I continue to look at this from a perspective of what is the spillover effect from what's happening between Russia and Ukraine and countries like Belarus, which is a major exporter of potash and different inputs around the world. What is your perspective of the spillover effect of what's happened here?
Well, when you're in the fog of war, it's clearly a fog at the beginning. So there's a lot we don't know, but it always brings rapidly changing events, and that's what we're into. What Putin looks like he's doing is he may build a land bridge between Crimea that he took over in 2014, and that was a major U.S. and Western ally fault from not doing anything to him, much of significance, because it allowed all those years for Russia, Putin in particular, to get his country ready for what he wants to do to get as close as possible back to the old Soviet Union. That's big time stuff. So what now we have to watch out for is how does he further expand initially the war with Ukraine? Does he shut off Ukraine's ports? Well, and that looks like that's what he wants to do. If that's the case, he'll throttle Ukraine commercially as well, but that'll boost the ag markets up because of what I said before. And then you have to see where else he may go to. If he flirts at all with any NATO nation, the NATO Clause 5 says that they will come to the support of that. That's a little getting ahead of ourselves. I would watch out. There's China impacts here too. There will be a vote in the United Nations National Security Council. I'm going to look closely at how China votes. If they vote in favor of Russia, that's one thing. Most people expect that. But if China abstains from voting, that tells you that they're a little more cautious on this development than most people think right now.
What about the reaction from some of the other, you mentioned NATO allies here. Have we seen any indication of what that reaction will be to this? Is there anything other than sanctions that can be done at this time?
And weak sanctions so far. Boris Johnson of the United Kingdom has been the most aggressive so far. We've seen Germany suspend, not cancel, Nord Stream 2, and for obvious reasons, I guess. Germany Angela Merkel, when she was prime minister over there, made a strategic mistake a few years ago. 30% of Germany's energy production was nuclear energy. She cut it across. She just cut it out. In this country, we saw when President Biden first came into office, he began his sinking of the crude oil industry with his rejection of the XL pipeline, his all the other things that he did from a regulatory perspective. It's going to be quite ironic now that he's going to have to call on OPEC and also asking the U.S. to build up their natural gas production in order to bail out Europe. And that looks what we're going to have to do. But right now, unless they really get at the financial system in Russia, it's called the SWIFT program, that Germany, by the way, is not in favor of at this particular time. So NATO is not all in agreement right now. Plus, you have to go after Putin's own money around the world and his key oligarch officials. So, that's where we're at right now. We're just uncharted waters, all the flavors of a possible expanding war at this particular time. Biden will speak to the nation. He is going to have a meeting with the G7 officials, but now they have to do far more significant sanctions than the ones that we saw earlier this week.
Jim, last question. I know you've done this a long time, obviously lived there in D.C. In or around folks. Characterize this for me. How does this feel compared to other major events that you've covered and been a part of through the years?
Well, from a geopolitical perspective, it feels a lot like the pandemic that we've gone through. You want to throw your hands up in the air and say, "Oh my God, what's next?" And, I was a history major in college more than a few decades ago. And again, I don't like to say this, but when you have weak leaders in the U.S., the Western countries, look at Boris Johnson, Trudeau, Comrade Trudeau, some people call him, this is what happens. And when you don't have the U.S. and Western allies tell Russia in 2014 and also under Bush, under Georgia, that there will be consequences. This allowed Putin many years to build up his defense. And if you heard Putin's comments overnight or very early this morning, he definitely threatened the Western world and any country that would take them on, because he said Russia has weapons that are better than most other countries. There's no other thing. War of words now has turned into war. And that's what we're seeing unfold with very significant market impacts in the U.S. and the world. The seriousness of this also is if the energy price, if crude oil, Brent, the international crude, if it goes close to $120 a ton, history shows that will lead into a world recession. We don't need that, because now this will even increase inflation and even more higher in this great country. And agriculture, I've given a lot of speeches lately. The government says we've got inflation of 7.5%. That's laughable. In agriculture, it's in the double-digit arena already. You put energy prices into this. I don't care what the administration does short term, whether or not they do away with the 18-cent gas tax. That's a facade. That's maybe one day's movement in the gas price when you're in war. So we've got some things to chew through. So again, I don't like saying these things, and I don't like any president to be weak, whether they're Republican or Democrat. But this is what you get when you have a weak president of the United States, the so-called leader of the Western world.
Well, Jim, we'll continue to follow this. Obviously, it's a developing story. We'll check back in with you over the next days and weeks to see where this continues to take not just the ag industry, but the U.S. as well. Thanks so much for being here, Jim. Appreciate it.
Sure. Anytime.